So what you see on the screen now is what we're going to be building out today. We might be able to touch on the characters portion. So for today, we know for sure we're going to be working on the comics. I might be able to get to the character portion if this isn't too long, but last thing we're going to be doing is the titles. So right now we're probably going to just focus on the comic and the characters. So let's start out with the back end of the comics, and then we're going to get into the front end. Hey there guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be working on part 3 of our application. So last we left off, we built this comic schema out. So what we're going to do in this one is we're going to work on building out the back end for the comics, and then we're going to go over to the front end and build out the UI, UX, and the display, basically the front end for the comic view. If you guys like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let's get right into it. So what we're doing first is we're just going to close out a comic, and then we're going to come to the back end here. We're going to go to our API, and we're going to create a backend API called comics. So we're going to go new folder, and this folder is going to be comics, and we're going to create a route.js. And then within this route, let's just minimize this. And then within route.js, we're going to have import crypto from crypto. We're going to have import Axios from Axios. We're going to have import comics or comic, whatever we called it. There we go, from model comic. And then we're going to import our database connect. And that's about all we're going to import. Now, since we're getting data from Marvel API, there's a specific way they want us to request the data. So what we need to do is create a timestamp, and here we're going to say new date, and it's going to be .get time. So that's how we create our timestamp. We want to get our private key. So remember I said we saved our private key within our env term, within our env file. So it's going to be process.env.private key. And then we're going to state, well, that should say private key. Here we're going to say public key is equal to process.env.public key. Awesome. Now we want to create our hash. So we're going to say const hash is equal to crypto dot create hash, and then it's going to be MD5. All right. And then it's going to be dot update. And here we're going to say TS dot to string. So we want the timestamp to be turned to a string, plus private key plus public key. Awesome. Then we want to end it by saying .digest. So there we go. .digest hex. So that's how we create our hash, and this is how they want us to request data from the URL. So when we set up our URL, this is how they want us to set it up. So you'll see further along the lines on how the URL is going to look. Also, I'm going to just run through the logic and then come back and explain things as we go along. So that way we're not spending too much time on each line of code. So here we're going to say export const dynamic is equal to, we're going to say force dynamic. And this is going to be due to when we build it, we want this route to be dynamic. Export a sync function. We're going to say get request. Then we're going to state await db connect. Awesome. So now when we come back up here, we're going to state const comic name is equal to, and I'm going to pick Wolverine. And what this means is when you come over here and you look at Discover Comics, all these comics that are rendered when the page loads are all Wolverine comics. Now you can go ahead and pick any one of any comic character you want for their comics to be displayed. I personally like Wolverine, so I'm just gonna go with this one. So now we can just come back So that's what this Wolverine means. So like I said, if you want something else, you can always go for something else. So now, and I have it as an array because I was going to use multiple comic names. So like multiple comic characters such as Wolverine, maybe Nightcrawler, something like that. But I ended up just going with Wolverine. I deleted the rest of them. So that's why it's in an array. You don't have to put it within an array. But that's why I did that. But for simplicity's sake, just do it how I have it. So try catch here. For the try, we're going to say const response is equal to await axios.get, and this is where we create our URL. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste the URL and show you what it looks like. All right, so this is what the URL is going to look like. So it's going to look like this. So let me see. I think there's a misspelling somewhere. This says public key. This says, there we go. So let's just do it this way because that's how I have in the other one, just so I don't have to change anything up. So I just changed it to public and private key here. And that's it. So with the URL, we have HTTPS. So we're making a request here. So it's HTTPS gateway.marvel.com 443 v1 public comics. We're using title, and then we're going to say is equal to the comic name, which is this. And then the timestamp is TS, which is up here. API key is the public key, and we're just going to hash it. So the problem here is that we did this rather than just say this. So private key, how do we have it here? Private key, there we go. Awesome. So there shouldn't be any problem here. So as you can see, it's a get request. So we're using a get request here, and this is the URL we're trying to get our data from. So once we do that, now we can go ahead and state const comics is equal to response.data.data.results. Awesome. You go ahead and save that. Now there's another part for this comics that we're going to talk about. So there's another part to this comic backend that we're writing that we're going to talk about. So here, what we want to do now, our next step is to extract user ID from query parameters. So for here, it's going to look like this. So const, we're going to say search params is equal to new URL, and this is going to be request.url. And let's write the second line here. We're going to say const user ID is equal to search params.get. We're getting that user ID. Awesome. So this is how we get our user ID. So the reason we want to get this user ID is because, so if we have a user ID, then we want to be able to fetch our saved comics for the user. So we're going to say const saved comics is equal to await comic dot find. So let's do this dot find, and we're going to say user, which is user ID. All right, so it's all good. So we're going to say const save comics is equal to await comic.find user ID. So now we're going to say const saved comic IDs is equal to saved comics.map, and let's just do this comic.comic ID. Okay, so what are we doing here? So let's head on back to our application and see what's going on. So within this application, as you can see, if we go over to, let's just click on this. Let's save this comic, right? So this is saved. So if we go over to our saved, actually, let's delete everything here. So let's refresh this. So nothing is saved right now. So we're just going to focus on comics. So if we go ahead and save, what's this called? Wolverine 2024 #1. So let's save this. And let's go ahead and go back over to saved. So as you can see, this is saved. Now, if we go back here and we refresh this page, so let's go ahead and refresh it. As you can see, this still shows that it's saved, even though I refresh the page. So I refresh it, it still shows that it's saved. Why? That is because we're using the user ID to grab the saved comics and then show them whenever this page is loaded. So that logic is done with the front end using useEffect. However, with the back end, we want to make sure that when the front end calls this backend URL, the comics URL, comics URL, when it calls this backend route, then we want to be able to also send over the data for those items that are within our saved saved page. So items that are saved, we want to also show them within our within our hero page. So that's what this is saying. And the way we do it is by assigning IDs and using the user ID to make sure that data is correct. So now after if user ID, then we want to say let's see. So if user ID, sorry. So we still have a lot more to say when it comes to user ID. So if we have a user ID, we want to be able to grab the saved comics. So we want to find the user ID in order to get the saved comics. And now for saved comics IDs, we want to take those saved comics, map through them, and grab the comics with the comic ID. Then we want to state, we want to be able to add saved status to the comics. So we want to say const comic with saved status is equal to comics.map, and here we're going to say comic, and we're going to say, we're going to destructor comic here, and then we're going to say is saved comic IDs dot includes comic dot ID dot toString. So I'm going to go ahead and explain that in a second, but let's just keep working on this. And then we're going to say return next response dot JSON. So I don't know why that doesn't auto next response dot JSON. And here we're going to be returning comic with saved status. And this is going to be status of 200. And then we can go ahead and do this. There we go. So now if there is no user ID, we still want to be able to return next response. There we go. .json. And this is going to be comics. So we're just returning the comics. And then this is going to have a status of 200. And then for the error, we're going to state console. Let's go back, console.error, and this is going to be error fetching data. This is going to be error. And here we're going to say return next response.json. And this is going to say message, and the message is going to be error fetching data. And the status here is going to be 500. Awesome. So what this is saying is, let's come back over to this user ID. So what this is saying. So let's come back to this user ID and I'll explain what this is saying. So basically, if comic ID is in the saved comic IDs array, is saved will be true. So that's what this is checking for. So that's what the dot includes is checking for. So if the comic ID is in the saved comic IDs array, is saved is true. Otherwise, is saved is false. So that's pretty much what that's pretty much what's going on here. Now, when we go further in the front end, you'll see what I mean. So right now, only if you kind of understand how the backend works, you'll be able to picture it. But with the front end being implemented later on, you'll see exactly what it is that I'm talking about. But with that, let's move on to our next API route as we're done with comics for right now. As a matter of fact, before we go ahead and go to our next API route, we can test this to see if we get anything back. So this route is comics. That's what this route is. So if we go back to our browser and we go to localhost 3000 / remember mine's running on localhost 3000, rather than /hero, and we go back and we say /API /comics. Let's see, is it comic or comics? Yep, /comics. And we run that. this is the data we get back. So this is what we're requesting. So as you can see, this is all the data we're requesting from from Marvel API. Now, with what we just said, as you can see, since there's no user ID, it just returns literally every single comic that we requested. So yeah, it doesn't what's this one? It doesn't return comic with saved status. It just literally returns every single comic. So that's what this is. So because here comics is response.data.data.results. So that's what it's returning, because this user ID logic is not true. So it's just going to return this, and that's pretty much it. So we can close out of this and go right back to /hero, and that's it. So now for our next route, we're going to close out of this. And for our next route, we're going to come back to API. And here, our next route is going to be called saved comics. So here we're going to go to a new file, actually a new folder, and we're going to call this saved comics.js. Well, just save comics. And then new file will be route.js. So here, what are we doing? What we want to do is say import comic. There we go. And we want to say import user from model user, and then we want to say import database connect, and now we want to say export the sync function, and it's going to be a post request, and we're going to say await database connect. We're going to have a try catch here. And within the try, we're going to say let, because we want this to be mutable. So we're going to say comic and then user ID. And we're going to say await request.json. Awesome. So here we're going to say if we have a user ID or we don't have a comic, then we want to state return next response. So it's not going to be a next request, it's going to be a next response .json. And here we're going to say message of please sign in and resave item. And you'll see how this works in a front end. It's also going to have a status of 400. And if we do have that, so if we do have this should say if we don't have a user ID. So if we do have a user ID and a comic, then we want to state const user is equal to await user dot find by ID, and we're going to be taking in that user ID. And then if there is no user, so another check here, we're going to say return next response.json. And here we're going to say message. And the message here is going to be please sign in. So although these checks are nice, the thing is, it's probably not going to get to this, right? Because you can't even access the page if you're not signed in. So it's just a good habit to have to do error handling. So if we get an error like this, maybe the user cookies timed out or something like that. So we get that. But other than that, we're just trying to make sure we cover all bases here. So this is for if there is no user. Now, if there is a user, we want to check that the comic exists in the database. So we want to say const existing comic is equal to await comic dot find one, and here we're going to say comic ID is equal is comic dot ID dot toString. Cool. Let's see, comic ID. There we go. Let's have another. We also want to state. There we go. We also want to state user is going to be user ID. There we go. So we're trying to find comic ID, which is comic.id.toString, and a user for user ID. So now we're going to state if there is an existing comic, then we want to return it. So return next response.json message, and the message here is going to be comic is already saved. And then the status here is going to be 409. Actually, looking back at this should be named save comic, not saved. So let's rename this save comics. There we go. And so my explanation was actually poor at first. So let's go back to the application. So here we're not fetching this. What we're doing is, just as I hit this icon and it turned red to save, that's the function that's being ran. So if I hit this, we're running this save comic function. So that's why it says if existing comic, return comic is already saved. So I can't resave it. You know what I'm saying? I can only unsave it. So that's what this is saying. I can't save the comic twice. So to fetch the saved comic is going to be a whole different API. So as you can see, that's what this is. It's not saved comics, it's save comics. So now if we have an existing comic, it's not going to let you save it again. It's going to be a status of 409. However, if that comic is not saved, then we want to do one thing. So we want to say const formatted, formatted. Is that how you spell formatted? Yeah, format. Is that how you spell formatted? Let's see. Const formatted. There we go. Formats ed. Let's just go with that. So we're gonna say formatted URLs is equal to comic.urls.map. And here we're gonna say URL object, and we're just gonna do, actually we don't even need that. We can just say URL object.url. So what is this doing? Here we're ensuring that the URL that we're going to be inputting into our schema is an array of strings. So we want to format it to make sure it's an array of strings. So what we're doing here now is we're going to say we're going to create a new comic item. So this is to save it. So we're going to say const new comic is equal to new comic, and this is going to state comic ID, which is going to be comic.id.toString. This is going to say title, which is going to be comic.title, and this is going to be description, and this is going to be comic.description. And now we're going to have thumbnail, and this is going to be comic.thumbnail, and we're going to have URLs, and this would be formatted URLs, and we're going to have a user, which is user ID, and then we're going to have saved set to true. So if this looks familiar, that what is going on here? Awesome. So if this looks familiar, that's because if we come over to our model comic here, it's pretty much the same thing here. So this is how we want to save it, is why we're pretty much creating a schema to save the new comic. That's pretty much it. Now let's come over here. We're just gonna have the ability to save it. So we're gonna say await new comic dot save. Cool. Now we want to return next response.json. There we go. And this is gonna have the message of comic saved successfully. There we go. And then we want to have a status of 200. And then for catch, what we want to state is console.error, and we want to say error save in comic, and this should say error. And we also want to say return next response.json, and this is going to say message internal server error, and the status here is going to be 500. So that's pretty much it. So now, just to backtrack on what we're doing here, so this is the backend route that allows a user to save a comic. So here from the front end, since as you can see it's a post request, so from the front end we're trying to grab this comic and the user ID. So because when you click save, we should be getting in the backend the comic and the user ID for that user. If we don't have any of that, then you're not signed in, you can't save them. However, if you do have a user, what you can do is say, look through the user model, find that user ID. Now, if there's no user ID, then you're not signed in. However, if there is a user ID, you can now check to see if there's already an existing comic within the database pertaining to that user ID. So you check the existing you check the comic database. You try and find one of this that pertains. So you say comic ID, comic.id to string. So you're looking for that comic ID, and then you're finding the user ID. So if it matches, then the comic is already saved. So you just go with the status 409. Now, if it's not, if there's no existing comic, what you want to do is first format that URL to make sure that it is an array of strings, because I believe the Marvel API does not give you back an array of strings. So when you do that, you're now able to save the URL as formatted URLs. But before we jump to that, what we want to do is we want to now state new comic. We want to create a variable called new comic, and this new comic is creating a new comic item within the database, and these are all the key value pairs here. So comic ID would be that's a good catch. So this should be comic ID. There we go. So comic ID will be comic.id.toString. We have title, comic.title. We have description, comic.description. We have thumbnail, comic.thumbnail. URLs is formatted URLs. Users, user ID, and saved is going to be true. And then we just await new comic.save, and it's saved in our database. So we have the response of comic saved successfully with a status of 200. If there's an error, then we say console.error, error save in comic with an error, and then we return response stating there was an internal server error if there was an error here, and the status code be 500 because it's a server error. But that's pretty much it. So now let's jump over to our third backend route. So our next route is going to be, let's come over to API and we're going to create a new folder, and this route is going to be called comic search. And what this does is, I'll show you in a second. Let's just have this as route.js, and let's just close out of this. So what this does is, when you come back to the application, if you scroll down to comics and you hit view all, as you can see, you can search with either the comic title and or the issue number. So for example, we can say Wolverine, enemy of state. Is it enemy of the state? Here we go. So we have this Wolverine, enemy of the state, or we can also have Thor issue number 5. So as you can see, it shows all the cover art and comics related to Thor #5. So if you click on it, it says Thor #5. If you click on this, it says Thor #5. This is 2018. This is 2020. These are just different variations of Thor #5. So as you can see, the main point is that you can search things here, either with the comic title or the issue number. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. Let's view less here. So that's what we're trying to accomplish with this route that we're building out. So here, what we want to say is import crypto from crypto. And then we want to say export async function post request. And we are going to say comic. Actually, we're going to say const comic title and issue number. So we're getting this from the front end. So await request.json. Awesome. So now we want to say const private key. Actually, you know what? We're just going to go back to our comic route and we're just going to grab this because this is what we need. Because we're going to be getting the data from Marvel. So we're just going to do all this. There we go. So we just need all this again. And then let's go down some. So now we're going to say try catch. And within try, we're going to say let URL equal. And I'm just going to go grab that URL really quickly. And we're going to paste it in there. So as you can see here, it's pretty much the same thing, except we don't have the title, the comic title, the issue number appended to it yet. So what we want to do is we're going to say if we have comic title, then we want to state URL plus or equal to this. So what this is saying is if there's a comic title, then we want to add to our URL here. We want to add it. That's why this is a let, not a const. We want to add or append at title and comic title. And we're just putting this in code URI component because we're trying to make sure that the string is a valid component of the URI. So that way you don't get an error even if you might spell the thing right, but maybe you put a hyphen instead of something else. So a hyphen might cause an error, but if you encode the whole component, the URI component, then there's a way it gets passed to the backend and allows the data to be received. So that's all it's saying. Now we're also going to have if we have comic title. Well, not comic title. If we have issue number, then we want the URL to also be plus equal this. So here we're saying if we have an issue number, then we want to append the issue number to this. So this way we're not just having a comic title and an issue number appended together, appending to the URL at the same time all the time, only if conditions are met. So here we're saying issue number is equal to issue number. Here it doesn't need to encode URI component because one, it's not a string, so that's the basic reason. So we can now go on and state const response is equal to await axios.get, and we're getting the URL. Now we can say return next response.json, and this would be response.data.results, and the status would be 200. And we just got to make sure this imports. There we go. And then for error, we're just going to say console.error, and this will be error fetching data, and we're gonna have this as error. And then we're gonna say return next response.json, and this is gonna be message error fetching data, status of 500. Maybe we do something wrong here. Let's see. Oh yeah, that's why. So it should be here. Status here of 500. Awesome. So this is how we get our search data. So this is how we search data and get our search data. So now we can go over to our front end, and what we want to do in the front end, actually not necessarily our front end. So what we want to do is we want to create server actions. So that way serves as an intermediary between our backend and our front end. So not necessarily a middleware, but it serves as server action. Let's go ahead and close out of this, and we're gonna close out of all this. So within our source folder, we're gonna create a new folder, not a new file. So let's go over here, create a new folder, and here we're gonna call it comics fetch. Actually, let's delete that. So within source, let's see. So within source, it's actually going to be a new file. So this is going to be comic fetch.js. Cool. And here what we're doing is we're writing out various server actions that will allow us fetch data. So for example, here we're going to be getting the fetch. We're going to be fetching comics, and we're going to be passing the user ID to the backend, because remember when we created the API backend for comics, there's a component there that uses there's a logic that uses user ID. So here we're going to say import Axios from Axios. Then we're going to say export a sync function fetch comics, and here we're going to be passing in the user ID. And we're going to say const response is equal to await axios.get /API /comics /user ID is equal to, and we're going to say user ID. So it should be backticks. There we go. So here we're passing the user ID as a parameter. And lastly, what we want to do is just return response.data. Okay, now we also want to be able to get the comic to fetch comics, to fetch search comic, to fetch the comics that we search. So that's a better way of saying it. So we want to say export a sync function comic search fetch comic title, and this is going to be issue number. So we literally just worked on this. So here we're going to say const response is equal to await axios.get .post, and this is going to be /API /comic search, and we're going to be passing the issue. Let's start with comic title, and also the issue number. And here we're going to say return response.data. Awesome. So these are going to serve as our server action. So when we use them, you're going to see how we do that. Now, just a disclaimer, within the front end, I will be using these server actions, but then again, sometimes I might get lazy and just call the API right there in the front end, like within our front end code. So just pay attention to that. But for the most part, we're going to be using our server actions. So we also want to create another one, a new file here. Let's close that. Let's create it first. So this new file is going to be for saved items .js. So let's go ahead and close this. Now there's nothing really going to go in there right now, but we're just going to introduce it. And this is not to save our comic. This is to get the items that we've already saved. So we've not created our API route for that yet, because that's going to be later on. Right now, let's just start on our front end code, so that way you see what's going on in real time. Actually, rather than go straight into the front end, let's go ahead and just finish up all our API routes, because they're going to come in handy as we build the front end. So regardless of what page we're building, let's just go ahead and do all the back end routes for our comic, and then we'll be able to just speed run through the front end. That way we don't have to miss steps in the front end just to compensate for it. So what we want to do is let's go back to API over here. Let's see. There we go. So we go back to API, and here we're going to make a new folder, and this folder is going to be called get saved comics. And then we're just going to new file. It's going to be route.js. And in this route, what we're doing is we're getting the comics that we have already saved. So whatever comics we saved, like we press the heart icon on, we're retrieving them. So that's what we're doing here. So what we want to do first is say import, and here it's going to be comic. So the model comic, and then here we're going to be importing the DB connect. Then we're going to go down and we'll say export a sync function, and this is going to be a get request since we're going to be getting the items. And here we're going to say await database connect. Awesome. And now we can say const URL is equal to new URL, and this is going to be request.url, and we're going to say const user ID is equal to url.search params.get, and we're going to be getting the user ID. And we already explained how this works in a previous API route. So here we're going to say if we have the user ID, then we want to return next. Well, if we don't have the user ID, then we want to return next response.json, and this is going to be message, and the message here is going to be user ID query parameter is required. There we go. And this is going to give us a status code of 400. There we go. So that's for if there's no user ID. And now after we have that, we can have a try catch here. So if we do have a user ID, we're going to have a try catch, and this try is going to have const saved comics is equal to await comic dot find, and this is going to be user ID. And here we're going to say return next response.json, and here we're going to have comic. Let's actually make this lowercase. Comics, well, comic is going to be saved comics, and then we're going to have a status of 200. And then for error, we're going to say console.error, and it's going to be error fetching saved comics and error. And now we're going to return next response.json, and this is going to be message, and the message here is going to be internal server error with a status of 500. Let's see what's going on. Oh, awesome. So just like that, we've written our logic to get our saved comics, and it's not that much. So what we're doing is we're checking to see if we have the user ID. If we don't have the user ID, then we're returning user ID query parameters required. If we do have the user ID, then we're trying to find within our comic database the user. So we're trying to see if we have a user coinciding with the user ID, and if we do, we want to return saved comics. So the comic is just going to be the saved comic. So everything within that user, anything saved within that user ID is going to be our saved comics, and then we're just going to return that to the front end with a status of 200. The error is pretty self-explanatory, so we've been doing this all day. So this is just in case we have an error. So now what we want to do is we want to come over to the backend again. So let's go ahead and close this out, and in the API we're going to create a new folder, and this folder is going to be delete comic. So this is going to help us delete our comics, called delete comic, and we're going to have /id because it's going to be taken in the ID parameter. There we go. So let's go ahead and now create a new file, and this file is going to be called route.js. So this is what we have. So one trick is when you do write it, so when you say delete comic /id so let me do that again so you guys can see what I did. So delete, move to trash. So when you come into API and you create that new folder, so it's delete comics or delete comic / and then you want to do that and say ID. Now rather than pressing enter, just click another API, just click API, and then it saves. If you press enter, it might save it as another folder within it, and then here just new file, you're just gonna have route.js. So delete comic and /id should be on the same line, and then when you enter it, you should see it here as delete comic ID and then route.js. So that's just a trick for you guys. Go ahead and close out of this one. So what you want to do now is, let's just minimize this. So here what we're trying to do is we're trying to write a function or a logic that's going to delete a comic for us using the ID. So here we're going to say import comic. We're going to be importing db connect, and then we're going to be importing something called object ID from MongoDB. There we go. Now we can say export sync function, and this is going to be delete request. It's going to take in a request, and here we're going to have await database connect. Cool. Now we want to extract the ID from the URL, so this is going to be done a little differently. So we're going to say const URL is equal to new URL, and this is going to be request.url, and this is going to be let ID equal url.pathname.split, and we're going to be splitting it with this because it's /id, and then we're going to have pop. There we go. Now what we want to do is we want to check if the ID is a valid object ID, meaning it's valid within the database, or so we're checking to see if the ID is a valid object ID or comic ID. So now what we're going to say is const is valid object ID is equal to object ID. There we go. Object ID dot is valid ID. There we go. So now if we say try catch, okay, try catch. There we go. And within try, we're just going to say const delete comic is equal to is valid object ID, and we're going to say if it's a valid object ID, then we want to await comic dot find. There we go. By ID and delete, and we want to pass in that ID, and then we want to say or await comic dot find one and delete. There we go. Find one and delete. And here we're going to say comic ID, which is also ID. So if we don't delete a comic, then we want to return next response.json with the message could not find comic. So this is going to have a status of 404. Awesome. However, if we did delete a comic, then we want to return next response.json. And this is going to have the message comic deleted. And this is going to have a status of 200. So now for the error, it's going to be the same thing. So console.error. And then here it's going to be error deleting comic. There we go. This is going to be error. And then we're going to say return next response.json with a message internal server error. And this is going to have a status of 500. Just like that, we're done. So let's run through it. So here we get the ID from the URL. We're checking if the object ID is valid. So we're going to say object ID is valid, and we're checking the ID. So now we want to run the write a try catch logic here. So we're going to say const delete comic. So if the object ID is valid, then we want to await. We want to check within the comic database, find the ID, and delete that ID out. Or if we have the comic ID, we want to find one and delete. So this says find by ID and delete. This one says find one and delete. So that's how we're gonna write that logic. So here, if we're not able to delete the comic, then we'll say comic cannot be found. That's because we don't have that object ID. So the object ID is not valid. So here, if we do have if we are able to delete the comic, then we're just going to respond with comic deleted with a status of 200. And then here's just a regular error handling. So that's all we're doing here. And then lastly, we have one more thing. So let's go ahead and save this, and we're going back to create our server action. So we're going to go back into our source folder, and we're just going to go down to our saved items.js because we already created that server action, so we don't have to do it again. We already created this file. So within this file, we're just going to write our logic in there. So for our logic, we're going to say import Axios from Axios. There we go. And then we're going to say export async function saved comic fetch, and this is going to have user ID as the parameter. And then we're going to say try catch, and within try we're going to say const response is equal to await axios.get /API/get saved comics. Is it get saved comics or just say get saved comics? Yes. So get saved comics, and here we'll pass in the parameter params, and this is going to be user ID that we're passing in. Awesome. So that's pretty much it. And now let's save that. We can return response.data. For the error, we're just going to say console.log error, and then we can say console.error, and this is going to say error fetching saved comic, and this is error. Awesome. So this is how we get our saved comic. Now for delete, we also want to stay within the same file, and we can come over here and say export async function, and this is just going to be delete and delete comic ID, and well, delete comic, and then we're going to pass an ID. There we go. And here we're going to say try catch. There we go. Within try, we're going to say const response is equal to await axios.delete, and this is going to be /API/delete comic /ID. Awesome. So next thing we're going to do is going to be return response.data. There we go. And for error, we're just going to do a simple one. So console.log, and this is going to be error, and we're going to say console.error, and this is going to be error deleting comic error. So now that we have all our server actions done for comics, we can now finally start getting our front end working. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so in order to start our front end, let's go ahead and open this up. And then here we want to go to, let's close out of app. And here we want to go to our comics.js. So I mean comics.jsx. So we're going to components, and then we're going to create here new file. And this is going to be comics.jsx. And comics.jsx is going to go into our route, our hero route. So here we're going to have comics. So let's go comics. Oh, that's because we did not export it. So let's go RAFCE, save that. And now we can go back to our hero page. And so our hero route, and this is going to be comics. Awesome. So now we exported that component. We can go ahead and close out of this, minimize this. So if we look over here, you can see that we have comics right underneath our banner. So this is the fun part. So let's go ahead and build that front end out. Okay, so just a forewarning, this is going to be a very dense front end, meaning I'm going to be using a lot of logic here and there, a lot of server actions. I'm going to be using Material UI, so a UI library. I'm going to be importing stuff, creating modals and things like that. So I need you to just stick with me while I do this. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask in the comment section. I will try my best to explain as I go on, but because it's the front end, majority of it is also going to be CSS. So I'm just going to run through that portion. So with that said, let's get right into building this out. So the first thing we want to do here is we want to say use client, save that. So now let's actually just make this full screen because we're going to be writing out a lot of logic first. Awesome. So now we want to do a lot of importing. So we want to import, we already have React here. So let's import use state and use effect. We're also going to be using use ref actually. Awesome. Import AI outline search, and we're going to say AI outline close. And this is going to be from React icons /AI. This one we're going to say import dialog, and this is going to be from at Material UI icon / actually it's not going to be icons, it's just going to be MUI material, and it's going to be /dialog. Awesome. So we're going to come down, and here it's going to be dialog title, and this is going to be dialog title. Awesome. So we're going to come down one, and this is going to be dialog context. There we go. Oh, content, and this is going to be dialog content. Awesome. Now we're going to be importing image from next image. We're going to be importing a bunch of stuff here. So this is going to be icon button. We're going to be importing button. we're going to be importing typography. We're going to be importing circular progress. So we're going to be importing all this from Material UI. And then we're going to be importing close icon. And close icon, this is going to be, actually, that's fine. So close icon from at MUI icons material / close. Awesome. Here we're going to import FA heart and FA reg heart. And this is going to be from React icons / FA. Here we're going to be importing Axios from Axios. And here we're going to import, let's scroll up, use auth. There we go. We're also going to be importing, actually, let's keep it at this. This is fine right now. So this is all we basically need. Anything else will just be auto imported. But these are all the libraries and everything we're going to be using. Now, within comics, what we're going to say is, we can go ahead and close out of this. And here we're going to be writing our state hooks. So I'm not going to write it one by one. I'm just going to speed through it, and then I can come back and show you what it looks like. So let's go ahead and just speed run through it. All right, so these are all the state hooks we're going to be using. So we're going to be getting comics, comic search, search results, show all, visible comics, open, selected comic, comic details, comic loading, recommendations, recommendation loading, and we're going to be getting the user ID from use auth. Dialog content ref is use ref null. So all this is going to make sense once we start using it. You'll see what each hook pertains to. So with that said, let's go ahead and actually start writing our logic. So now down here, we can also use effect. And here we're going to state we want to load the comics when the user ID changes. So here we're going to say async function, and this is going to be load comics. All right. And for load comics, we're going to say try catch. There we go. And within try, we're going to have const data is equal to await fetch comics. And here we're using that server action fetch comics. So it's going to automatically import fetch comics from your comic fetch server here, server action here. So if we go over here, comic fetch, it's importing this fetch comics, and it's going to pass in that user ID. So that's what that server action is doing. So fetch comics here, and we're going to pass in user ID. And then we're going to say, actually, now we're going to say const saved data. So now we want to get the saved data, and we're going to say await saved comic fetch. So it's going to fetch that as well. And here we're also going to pass in the user ID. Awesome. So what this is doing is it's retrieving comic data for the user. So this one's receiving just a regular comic data for the user. This one's retrieving saved comic data for the user. So now we want to say const saved data, saved comic IDs is equal to saved data dot comic dot map. So let's do this, comic dot map, and then here we're gonna say comic, and after doing that we're gonna say comic dot comic ID. And what this is doing is it's extracting comic ID from the saved comics. That's all it's doing. Awesome. So now we want to say const updated comics is equal to data.map, and we're going to say comic, and after doing that we're going to say, there we go, we're going to say dot comic, so we're just structuring comic there, is saved, and this should look familiar as we did in the back end, saved comic IDs dot includes comic.id dot toString. Awesome. And let's see, there we go. And one last thing, so I remember post edit in API we made an error, I think in comic search maybe, no, it had to be save comic. There we go. So in save comic here we have commid ID, so it should be comic ID. There we go. So that was one of the errors we had that I just had to make sure I had to change. There we go. So we just close out of this, but here updated comics, there we go. So here all that we're doing is so it's the same as the backend. We're just mapping over the fetch comics and adding an is saved property to each comic to indicate if it's saved or not. So it's the same thing we did in the backend. So now after doing that, we're now going to say set comic, or set comics. There we go. Set comics. So it's one of the hooks we had, and we're going to say updated comics. So that's going to be for comics. And now for error, we're going to say console.error, and this is going to be error fetching data, and this is going to be error. And then this is good enough. So now after doing all that, we can now come over here and make the dependency user ID. Awesome. So what this is saying is we want this to load when the user ID changes. So when the component mounts or when the user ID changes, the use effect hook will run this function. So that's what this is saying. So after having this use effect, we can now create another use effect. So this is going to be another use effect, and this use effect is going to be, let's write it out first. So if there's no comic search, so this is for when we try to search a comic. So if there's no comic search, then we want to set search results to an empty array. So that's what we're doing here. And then this is going to be dependent on if there's a comic on the comic search. So if we go to our application, so within this application, if I hit view all here and I type in Thor, for example, and I search it, as you can see, it comes up with all the Thor data that we need. However, if we now go back, as you can see, it goes right back to the original data that we had. So that way, when we delete the items there, we don't have to, let's say we say Thor, we don't have to click this X for it to be deleted. We can also just backspace all the way out. So for example, like I said, we hit Thor, we can just backspace all the way out, back, and this comes right back up. So that's all we're doing here. So that's what this use effect is doing. So basically when you search something, you get the search results, but if you clear out the search, then no search results should remain. So if you searched Thor and you clear out of it, Thor shouldn't show up anymore. The default data which was Wolverine, that's what we set it as, should be shown. So that's all this is saying. Now we can go ahead and create our toggle. So here we're going to say const toggle view is equal to, it's going to be an arrow function. And here we're going to say set show all. And this is going to be previous show all. It's going to be an arrow function. And we're going to say const new show all is equal to not previous show all. And I'm going to explain this in a second. That's what this new show all is. So now we're going to say set visible comics is equal to, actually not equal to, so we're setting visible comics as new show all. So if there's a new show all, then the comic.length should be shown. If not, then it should just be 10 items. So this should be comics. There we go. It should just be 10 items shown. And then we can return new show all. There we go. Okay, so let's explain this using that application again. So when we open that application, so within the application, if you come over here to discover comics, you'll see there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. There are 10 items that are rendered automatically. So that's what we set it as over here. So we said here we want the visible comics to be 10 items. So that's all we set it as. So now this toggle is saying when we click this view all, then we want to see all the data. So we want to see every data that's coming back from the API. So I think it's set to let's 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 19, 20. So automatically it's just 20 items. So you get 20 items sent back immediately. You get 20 items that's rendered rather than 10 when you hit view all. So what it's saying is how it knows to do that is when you toggle show all, then or view all, when you toggle it, it's going to show you the whole length of the comics. So the comic gives you 20 items. That's what it's saying. Now, if you're not showing all, you just want to see 10, which is what we see when we first open the application. So when you're not when you show all, you see 20 items, or however comes from the API, or however many you set from the backend to be sent to the front end. But if you hit view less, you only see 10 items. And this view all is in reference to this this show all is a function that this view all button is using. So now if we go back to the project, what this code is doing, so to break down this code, so previous show all is basically false. So all it does is it takes show all, so the default state of show all is false. So that's what show all is set to originally, false. So previous show all means false in this case. So it represents the original state of show all, which is false. So when it does that, it now says new show all is now not false, which means it's true. So new show all here is now true. So if new show all is true, then we're getting the comic dot length. If new show all is not true, then we only show 10. And then for return, we're returning the new state for show all. So since show all is true, the comics.length is called, so all the user sees all the comics. And that's all the new show all is doing. And when we return show all, we're just returning that new state show all. That's all it's doing. So that's all that toggle view is doing. So now we can go to our handle submit. So this is where we submit our search. So this is where we use comic title and let the issue number. So we can come down here, and what we're going to say is const handle submit is equal to async, and then we're going to state e.prevent default, and then we're going to say let comic title equal empty string, and we're going to say let issue number equal empty string. And remember, we're using let because we want it to be mutable. So here we're going to write a function that says const parts is equal to comic search dot split, and we're splitting it using a comma. All right, and then we're going to map through the part, and we're going to state parts dot trim. So parts dot, so this should be parts, not part. There we go. So it'll be parts dot trim. There we go. And I'm going to explain this later on. So there we go. Now we want to say constant title is equal to parts and the first item in the array. And if parts dot length is greater than 1, and parts the first item starts with this, there we go, then issue number is equal to parts 1 dot substring 1. Now we can have try catch here, and for try we're gonna say const search data is equal to await comic. So we're gonna be using the server action. So for the server action, it's gonna be comic search fetch. There we go, and we're gonna say comic title, and we're going to be passing in issue number. There we go. And then we can say const saved data is equal to await saved comic ID. No, it's going to be saved comic fetch. There we go. And here we're just passing in the user ID. Now we want to state that const saved comics is equal to await, and we don't even have to say await, we just say saved data dot comic dot map, and we're mapping through comic, and when we map through comic, we're going to get comic dot comic ID, or just an empty array. And like I said, I'm just going to explain this in a little bit. Just give me a second. So here it's const updated search results is equal to search data dot map comic dot comic. So it's basically the same thing we've been doing, and this is going to be is saved, and this is going to be saved comic IDs. So here this should be saved comic IDs, saved comic IDs. There we go. So is saved to be saved comic IDs, and then we're going to say dot includes comic dot ID dot to string. So this should look familiar, and that's it. So there we go. So now we can set search results to updated search results. And then for the error, we're just going to state console dot error fetching data error. All right, so what is this doing? So here we have a handle submit function, right? So we're gonna have let comic title be an empty string and let issue number be an empty string, and then we're gonna have the parts variable, and what it's doing is it's splitting the comic search. So whatever you search, it's gonna split it into an array using the comma as the delimiter. So basically when it splits the string, it's now going to map through it. So when it maps through it, actually there should be part. There we go. So when it maps through it, it gets a new array. And then remember, it's been split by this delimiter, this comma here. So it gets this part and then it trims it. And then what trims does, it just makes sure that there's no white space between the items that it returns. So that's all it's doing. Now the title now is part 0. So what does that mean? That means the first element of the comic array is what this title, so this should be comic title. There we go. So let's take out this const here. There we go. So this comic title, this comic title now is a variable for the first array within parts. That's all it's saying. So the first element of comic array is what comic title now pertains to. So this logic here, if parts.length is greater than 1 and parts1 that starts with hashtag, that all that's saying is if parts.length is greater than 1, meaning when we get this, when we run this logic and parts.length is greater than 1, and the second part, the second element within the array, so because part 0 is the first element, the second part of the array is part 1, and if it starts with this hashtag, meaning it starts with this hashtag, so hashtag, let's say Thor hashtag 5, meaning Thor issue number 5, then the issue number is now parts the second element within the array dot substring. So what's going on here? Oh, there we go. So parts dot substring 1. So the substring 1 just means it's removing the first character from the string. So it's not returning this part. So this hashtag is not going back to the is not being sent to the backend because it's not going to do anything with this hashtag. The hashtag just acts as a demarcation between the comic title and the issue number. So it just lets us know that that's an issue number, but that's for the front end. We don't really need that in the back end because it just sends back that issue number. So that's what this is doing. So the substring is removing this hashtag. That's it. That's all it's doing. So now we have this saying const search data is equal to, let's make sure everything there is set. Okay. So here we're saying const search data is equal to await search await comic search fetch, and we're sending back that comic title and the issue number, meaning that's being sent using our server action to the backend. And then const serve data, here we're saying await saved comic fetch, and we're sending the user ID to the backend as well. So this is just using server actions to send to post things to the backend. Now with saved comic IDs, we're just checking the saved data and we're checking to see if there's any comic ID. If there's not, then we have an empty array. And we'll update its search results. We're searching through, we're going through search data, mapping through it. We're gonna get back comic, and we're doing the same is saved logic that we've been doing all day. So that's the same thing here. And now to end it all, we're now going to say set search results to updated search results. So that means this is going to be our new search results. And that's practically it. And then we have our error handling here. So like I said, when we start building and you start seeing what's going on, it's going to click a lot more. It's going to click a lot faster. So now we can write our function to clear our search. So we'll say const clear search. And let's use the arrow function. And here we'll say set comic search. And set comic search will be a string. And then here we'll say set search results. And this will also be an empty array. And what does this pertain to? This means when we come over here to discover comics and we hit view all, if we type in Thor again, and I go ahead and click this button, which I have assigned the clear search function to it. So if I go ahead and click that, as you can see, it clears my search and it returns the default data. So now I can go ahead and hit view less and go back to our application. So that's all clear search is doing. So that clear search function has been attached to that icon, to that X icon. So when it's clicked, or that X button, so when it's clicked, it runs this logic. So lastly, what we now want to do is say const comics to render is equal to search results dot length is greater than 0. So if search results dot length is greater than 0, then we want search results, else we want comics dot slice 0 and visible comics. So what does this mean? So when we render our data, we either want to show our search results. So if the search results dot length is 0, is greater than 0, meaning there is search data. So there's data that we want searched. So we typed some kind of string into our search input field. Then we want to show the results for that search. However, if search results dot length is less than 0 or equal to 0, then we want the comics to render. We want the comics to render to be visible comics. So we want to slice between 0 and visible comics. So from 0 to 10. So because visible comics here is set to 10, so we're just taking from 0 all the way to 10. That's all we're doing here. All right. So now we have const handle heart click is equal to, it's going to be an arrow function. And what this does is, if we come back to our main application, you can see that here we have these heart-shaped icons where you can click it to save and unsave an item. So that's what that function is basically doing. So now we're going to say if comic that is saved, then we want to go ahead and unsave comic, and we're going to pass in comic. So here we're going to be taking in this comic parameter, and then unsave. So this unsave is a function that we're going to write in a bit, but right now I just know it says unsave. This is just a syntax error is all. Well, it looks at it as a syntax error, but it's done properly. So just keep it as unsave comic, and it's taking in that comic parameter. And then here it says else. So we have else save comic, and save comic is also going to be a function we write. Let's see, I don't know why it keeps doing that. So this is going to be save comic all right, let's leave it at that, and then this is going to be comic. All right, so now we have const truncate is equal to string num. So here we want to truncate some items, so like the description and things like that. So we're going to say string and number, so that those are the two parameters we're going to be using. So if string.length is less than num, then return string, and then we're going to say return string dot slice 0 num plus dot dot dot. So what this is saying is, in order to truncate something, we're going to pass in a string and a number. So if the string dot length is less than the specific number that we set it to, we want to return the string. However, if the string dot length is greater than the number we set it to, then we want to slice it from the first item, from the first string, well, the first item within the string, all the way to that item, and then we want to append an ellipsis to it, the dot dot dot. That's what we're saying. So you'll see it when we actually start typing out that front end, when we start building it out. So lastly, we want to say const print price. So print price is equal to selected comic dot prices dot find, and we're going to take in price, and we're going to say price. We don't really need this part. So we're going to say price dot type is equal to print price. And then we want to do the same thing for digital price. So let's just copy this down one. And for price, we're going to say digital purchase price is equal to selected comic dot prices dot find price. Here it's going to be price type, and this price type here is going to be digital purchase price. There we go. So what does that do? If we go back to our application, if we click on one of these, so let's click on this, and you scroll down, you can see it tells you what the print price and the digital prices are. So that's what this is. So we're going to be building this modal later on, but right now let's just start building out. Let's start looking at what the UI and UX actually looks like. Okay, now we have both things side by side. So here we can link this. Awesome. So we make that look better. Let's put this here. And now we can do this. So let's take this down one. We can do this. Awesome. So now we want to actually start building things that you can see here. So it's the fun part. So here we're gonna encapsulate this with a fragment. Awesome. So for div, what we're gonna say is div class name, and I'm gonna speed run through this like I did the last one. So I'm gonna periodically stop to explain what's going on, but for the most part, I'm just gonna speed run through it. All right, so now if we go up, let's go back to return. As you can see here, we have pretty much everything we need. So if we view all, you can see that. If you type in Thor, you can see this button shows. You have your submit button here. You can view less. So pretty much everything we need is done. So I'm just going to run through the code really quickly. So here we have regular CSS. We're using Discover Comics. Here we have a span to make it in line with this. So we have Discover Comics here. For this button, like I said, we use the toggle view for the onClick function. So as the onClick function, so toggle view, if you remember, is this one where it shows the comic length or show all. So let's see, where are we? So that's what the toggle view is. So the toggle view is this view all right here. So it either shows the whole comic length or it just shows the visible comics, so which are 10 items. Hence what this is doing. So here we have, if it's show all, it's showing how we have this form with the handle submit. The handle submit we already wrote up here. Let's see, here's the handle submit. So remember, it's taking the comic title and the issue number. So this is the logic here. So that's what we're doing here with the handle submit. We have the CSS, we have this input. For the input, we have a placeholder, comic title, issue number, example, Wolverine, enemy of the state, or Thor number 5. So that's a placeholder. Here we have comic search. So if we have a comic search, we want there to be a button, a close button. So when we search for something, as we type, and when we want to search, there's a close button that will clear out. Hence what this onClick is. It clears the search. So let's say I say, let's go here and I click in Thor again. I can click this button and it clears the whole thing out. So that's what this clear search does. And then we have the button for search. We have a search button here. So here we're gonna have this div, and what this div does is it's gonna show you if there's a show all, then it's gonna show a grid of 3 columns that's justified center. If not, so it's flex overflow x scroll with a height of 40 view height for the medium screens and up. So what this means is, like I said, for the grid, for show all, you're going to be seeing a grid with the column with 3 columns. And if you don't have show all toggled, then you're just going to see that the data being displayed on the x-axis, and you can scroll left or right on it. So with that, let's go ahead and place in our comics to render, which is where we actually see the data on our screen. So we see the actual comics on our screen. All right, so as you can see, this works perfectly. So the only thing we modified in our code was when you come up here, we forgot to we forgot to run load comics for this load comics function. So we forgot to run it here, and then within our server action, if you come to comic fetch, this should be a question mark, not a backslash. So we just have to change that up. So it should look like this: /API/comics question mark user ID, not a backslash, and then you should be all set. It might take a couple of seconds for this to render, just because depending on how strong your internet is, or how long it takes for the Marvel API endpoint to be reached. But then you get this. So this is what it's supposed to look like. Now if we try and let's say Thor search, so you can see that the Thor isn't working. So the problem with that is when let's go back over to our backend. So if we go to comic search, the backend here, you'll see that public key is not defined. So here it's not really defined, so we have to change that up. So public key here should just be, let's change this up, and this should be public key. We go ahead and save that. So that's pretty much it. So that was the problem there. So if we try and search it again, so it's not rendering for some reason. So if we open this up and we go to inspect and then we go to console, as you can see, we have an error here where it says cannot read properties of undefined, reading includes, and this is on line 87. So if we close out of this, let's go over to line 87 really quickly, and nothing is saved, so that's probably why it's throwing that error. So if we save that, we just add this optional chain in there, so this question mark, we save it, and then we can try it again. So let's try again. So let's close out of this, and let's say Thor, and then let's go ahead and search that. Awesome. So as you can see, this renders properly. So as you can see, this is everything rendering. So we have this part done. Now, if you click on it, nothing really happens. However, in our Marvel app, if we click on this, we have a modal. So now we're going to create that modal. So let's go ahead and do that. But beforehand, let's quickly explain what we did here. So if we view all here, we go ahead and close out of that, and that's it. So if we look over on this code, let's make this bigger. You can see that right over once we render the items. So here we have comics to render. We have the image. So we have the source as comic.thumbnail.path .comic.thumbnail.extension. So that's how we get the image. For icon button, we have this unclick E stop propagation. This is the styling for this icon right here, this heart-shaped icon. As you can see right now, nothing works with it. If you click on it, it just gives you an error just because we haven't formulated the logic for it. But this is all it is. So this is all that we need for it to be displayed. Here you can see handle heart click. We're passing this comic in here, and we're going to be using it. Where is it? Handle heart click. We're going to be using it here. So that's why we have this comic parameter here. So that's what we're going to be using for is saved and for unsaved comic and save comic. We are yet to write this function, so that's why we get this error. But before we write that function, let's go ahead and actually create our modal, so you can see the pop-up when you click on these comments. So we're actually going to stop right here. The video is longer than I wanted it to be, so we're just going to call it for here. The next one, which should be coming really soon, is going to work on the modal and add in AI recommendations to our comics. So with all that said, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you did enjoy the video, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.